thanks for coming out and being part of this talk, which is a bit of an experiment of sorts. Some of you might have been to some of the programming that we do here in this space. My partner Audrey and I put on a lot of concerts in the Bay Area. A lot of them are in more intimate salon-style settings, but I always feel like this place lends itself very well to that sense of intimacy, and is continuing to renew, I think, I don't know, the magic of what has happened in this space, just with all the beautiful additions that Michael and others have been working hard to make happen here. So it's really exciting to be in a space that's been lived in and where a lot of care has been put into it over the years, and a lot of people have brought creativity really for creativity's sake, I think, for coming together to create things, not necessarily creating, homegrown stage plays to have them end up on Broadway or something like that, but more to enrich the place and time that one lives, acting more from a need of meaningful experience through culture, through community. There's not a lot of spaces out there these days that I think have a very pure motivation for that, that also have, a rich history. So that all being said, the topic for the talk today of music, meditation, and creativity, I think the main intention of choosing these words is to hopefully demonstrate over the course of this brief presentation how these words, which might sound a bit vague at the moment, or everyone might have a different perception of what they could mean, and also maybe see them as more isolated things, that they can be worked with and experienced in a way where they're actually a continuum. They're actually all working together. And actually, the more we can become aware of that in our own experience, the more meaningful, effective, creative we can be in whatever art form we're working in. I mean, in this case, we're talking about music, but you could really substitute the word music for any craft, anything that you feel a personal connection to, that you put time and energy into and return to, and there might be a history of, humans doing that over periods of time. But, often when we look into something like meditation, there's so many ways to talk about meditation. What is meditation? There's, especially today, a lot of mindfulness and, apps and podcasts and things. In my experience, I went to a college out in Colorado where I sort of immersed myself in studying different religious traditions, mostly Eastern, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism. I had an opportunity to work with a lot of teachers who some of are not around anymore, but they were all connected to these older traditions in different cultures, very different than, the place and time that we're in here, but they were part of traditions is the point. And I think over time I realized that these are crafts too. Meditation can be a craft. It's not necessarily just a lifestyle or something to make you feel more relaxed or, more at peace, although it can have those effects. But ultimately, they're just as in a musical tradition where you study with a teacher who studied with a teacher, and they're passing down this knowledge, this depth of awareness, these techniques. It's very similar in these more traditional approaches to meditation. And as far as creativity, obviously this is an element of art, but educationally, say we're looking at classical music, often there is an emphasis on craft. a lot of emphasis on craft in a very specific way. But as far as one's own personal voice, one's own personal intuition and feeling of where do I want to go with this music, or what music do I have to make and to share? In popular music, that's more of a centerpiece. Of course, craft is more de-emphasized in popular music, and you could say in traditions it's sort of the opposite. So craft and creativity, often one might go deep into one at the expense of the other. There are rare artists where they both are working together. Meditation, how does this fit into the whole thing? I think what I'll do, and in the spirit of this whole talk of bringing these together, I'm sort of improvising the talk. Later I'll improvise music. But the point is sort of allowing yourself to just be in a state of trusting the present, trusting the fact that the time and energy you've put into, your disciplines will come through in the way that it's meant to in the moment. And meditation is a lot about this kind of trust. I think maybe to start, the simplest thing to do, we'll start with this sort of meditation aspect, and then I'll go through the other two, and then I'll try to bring them together. But just for a moment, if you feel comfortable, we can just sit quietly for, maybe 30 seconds to a minute. No technique, no do this with your breath. It's more of, you could call it more a state of repose. So you're just sort of hanging out, just noticing what's happening, noticing your breath, noticing where your mind goes, where your thoughts are going. No expectation, no agenda, just checking in directly with what's happening. So we'll just for about 30 seconds, we'll just take a moment. So in a way, you could say whatever that is, whatever we were just doing, meditation is the process of developing a relationship to that. The process of letting the energy of our experience work on us versus us impose something on our experience. Often even with something like meditation, because our minds are so used to a very linear way of learning, of receiving information and processing and doing something with it. Even with meditation, you go, okay, tell me what to do. Tell me what do I do with my awareness? What do I do with my breath? Is this working? Am I doing it right? Why don't I feel relaxed? Why am I having so many thoughts? Why can't I pay attention? My body hurts. I feel uncomfortable. I got to do this later. All this kind of thing. And you could say that moment of openness, without definition, just mystery, just I don't know, this is happening, I don't know, I feel a little uncomfortable. That's, in a way, you could say that's a space of creativity. It's a pregnant space of potential. Something is happening. Something is definitely happening to you in that moment. And craft, in a sense, is, well, how do I work with this energy? How do I actually make it something that's relatable to me? How do I develop a relationship in a way that I feel I can be in this moment, in my experience? Maybe you can go back in time and say, okay, if someone was living out in the wild and there was a thunderstorm, maybe you were terrified of the thunder and you didn't know what to do. You couldn't relate to that. So what did we do? We developed maybe a dance or a song. We brought people together and created a relationship. We created mythologies. We did all of this. These are all, in a way, tools that we used in order to develop a relationship with our experience. in a way that it felt workable, versus something where you freeze up, you contract, and the more we freeze up and contract, the less feeling we have in our experience, the less meaning we feel in our experience. So becoming sensitive to this pulling away of like, I can't relate to that. And that we're actually doing that all the time to ourselves. We're pulling away from our experience as where meditation is leaning into our experience. And that includes things that don't feel very good. And it's not about sitting and torturing yourself with, what you're struggling with. It's more about understanding how we're actually, in a way, creating more turmoil because we don't have the right tools to relate to the immediacy of that energy of our experience. So now I'm just going to give a very simple practice that maybe helps us create a little more space within which we can relate to our experience. This will just be a little brief guided meditation. So to start, we do want to be a little more intentional about our posture, so we can kind of just sit more upright, have our legs straight. You can just have your hands resting down. You can have your gaze a little in front of you, a few feet. It could be soft. You can close your eyes as well. Whatever allows you to just feel more attentive. And we're going to bring our awareness into our belly, about a couple inches behind our belly button towards our spine. We're just going to imagine breathing into this almost walnut-sized little hole in the center of our belly on the inhale. And then we're just going to relax on the exhale. So we're bringing our mind down into our belly, just relaxing, allowing the breath to be natural, but maybe a little more full, intentionally full on the inhale. And then as we exhale, we can start to pull the belly button back to our spine and pull up our perineum, almost like we're, squeezing, holding, going to the bathroom. If it's not comfortable, you don't have to do that part, but on the exhale, you just kind of want to pull back and pull the base up and the belly button back towards the spine, and then relax again on the inhale. So on the exhale, it's like you're squeezing out fully all the way the exhale. We often don't fully exhale in our day-to-day, and therefore we don't fully inhale. So we want to, on the exhale, it's like we're squeezing out all the stale air in our belly region here, and then we relax and let it fill again on the inhale. So it's like a balloon deflating and then opening and filling. And just do about 12 of these where you're gently squeezing on the exhale and relaxing, receiving air, filling the belly. What we're looking to do here is create more space in the abdomen and relax a little bit of the holding that we often have in this area and in our hips. As we make more space, we want to feel like we can touch into that space through the breath, through resting our mind in the belly. We're seeing if we can kind of drop down more out of our head, out of analyzing and goal-oriented activity, and just feeling and breathing. In a way, all of these techniques are just feeling and breathing, putting your attention in different places that are particularly poignant in shifting our perspective, shifting our relationship to ourselves or our awareness of ourselves. When you're done with those breaths, just do about 6 more, maybe a little more vigorously on the exhale. Just any little cubic centimeter left of stale air, just squeeze it out on the exhale and just relax on the inhale. And just notice if there's any shift in your experience. if it feels any different to be present compared to just a moment ago when we were just in repose. And again, these are just techniques. So meditation is actually always happening. We're just learning to tune into that state. Our body is always already aware. This feeling of space is always already in our belly. We're just learning to access these other aspects, more deeper, fuller aspects of our own embodied self. There's an analogy I like to use of just the ocean. And you could say that normally we're just focusing on the waves on the top of the ocean. So, all of the sensory information and all of our thoughts that are reacting to that information, those are all kind of the waves. And then below that are the currents, which are the breath, our feelings and emotions, our impressions, also our dreams. You could say the waves are associated with being awake and waking state. These currents are a little more ambiguous, and when we go to sleep and are in dreams, we're sort of immersing ourselves in these currents. And then if you sink all the way down into this depths here of the belly, it's like getting into the depths of the ocean, the deep, dark depths of the unconscious ocean. But it's very still there, it's very peaceful. And when we're resting in the depths, we can allow the currents to pass through us. We're not fighting with them. We're not trying to control the waves, make them act a certain way. We're sort of on the other side. And so meditation is sort of the ground. Now with creativity, we could equate creativity with inspiration, with, say we're resting in the ground, and we're also developing a relationship to our experience that's not just fight or flight, or, I hope I can make it through the day today, but actually finding more room and space. We might feel like we want to do something, maybe everyone has something that they feel they enjoy. It could be a serious craft, it could be reading a book, going for a walk, relating to people. Either way, it's something that emerges kind of spontaneously from this place of stillness. And in different traditions, they have different names for this. In the Tibetan tradition, sometimes they call it the yidam, which is basically a being, a deity, like those Tonka paintings where you see the different beings. You're assigned a being that you feel an affinity with, and you actually start to visualize yourself first relating to them, and then eventually as them. And that's like a traditional way to do it. In the West, we have the words genius or daemon. The genius was considered a being or a presence that would come through you. It wasn't just a personal thing of like, they're a genius. It was more something that you channeled that came through you, but you didn't have complete control or awareness of. It sort of, if anything, wanted to communicate with you in spite of you, and you had to open to that. And in a way, our talent, our inclinations, you could say, are our genius, our daemon, our yidam, whatever you want to call it. But I think in order to be fully open to that, it's very helpful to rest in a place that's receptive and open and available and not imposing anything on our experience. And so then we get to the actual craft, in this case of music. And, if you think about the origins of music, there's one story that I really like that is sort of indirectly attributed to Chopin. George Sand, who was the writer, who he was in a relationship with for a while there, wrote a book, and in one of the books, one of the characters who was very princely was very clear, and he was a musician, it was very clearly associated with Chopin, and he was speaking of where does music come from, and he said it comes from the woods, the forest. And he said, this is an old folk tale, and if you want to know where music comes from, go find a woodsman, someone who's chopping trees in the woods. and in the woods, which in a way is sort of a metaphor for this generative, place of the unconscious. There are birds, and these birds are singing songs, and every day they sing a different song, a different tune. They're just constantly changing what they're doing. It's just pure inspiration, improvisation, creativity. And the woodsmen, as they're working, they kind of unconsciously hum along with these songs. And so they're just kind of like a fountain of, music, melodies happening. And then they go into the village to get supplies, and they're singing these songs. And in the village, some of the villagers hear the songs, and they start to sing along and, go, oh, that's a nice thing. Maybe I'll share that with my friends. And eventually maybe it becomes a folk melody, a tune that village, adopts. And then maybe a composer comes to that village or is from that village. And when they're living in the big city and hustling and trying to make their way, they think fondly of these naive tunes that came from the village, that came from the forest, and use those as maybe a foundation for a composition, a string quartet, a symphony, or maybe it just becomes a very big popular song, in a city. But it all goes back to the forest. In the Buddhist tradition, there's also something called the forest tradition, which basically spoke to the fact that most traditional scholarship up until the mid-90s would talk about Buddhism at its height in India as there's the monastery and there's the lay people. And, if you want to be good and support the teachings of the Buddha, you either go join the monastery and study hard to be a monk, or you just are a good person in society and you give money to the monks and give money to the institution, and therefore you're doing your part. But what was being left out of this equation was the fact that where do these teachings come from? Where do the teachings come from that are in the monasteries, that the monks are practicing and sharing with the community? Well, it so happens that they came from teachers who were living in the forests. They weren't living in society. They were living in the wilderness, in the wild, untamed jungles. And there are stories of monks in monasteries who, knew that they intellectually knew the teachings within these institutional settings, but they also kind of knew that they were not really living in the fire of what these teachings were talking about. They have their comfortable place in their monastery. They have their resources, their securities, but some of them wanted the real thing, so to speak, and so they ventured out into the jungle. And there's all these very colorful stories of, monks finding their teacher who was crazy, and it was a big ordeal, and they had to let go of all their assumptions and things that they thought all of this was about. And this is not a large percentage of the population. This is a very small percentage. And you could say that for any art form as well. There's a small percentage of artists who really go as deep as they can into that raw, vulnerable, creative place. And many others are sort of just creating structures based on their journeys. And I remember I asked a particular teacher who did a lot of work to unearth this vision of the forest tradition. I said, well, where's the forest tradition today? It's not like you can just go out into the jungle. And it's the same with, obviously, you could see I'm implying a parallel to musical institutions, ways of learning your craft. Where is the forest tradition today? Where is that direct link to the deepest part of who you are, that ground level depths of the ocean, to the most manifest level of your own path and journey in this world of sharing your art? And he said, well, it's inside us. It's inside the depths of who we are. Again, we kind of, throughout our days, we sort of put a lid on all of this information that we're receiving in our bodies and the energy around us. We don't have the tools to really make it workable in the most full way we can. And I think with art, it's kind of the same. You want to have as wide a range of resources where you can go as deep into what your daemon, your genius, your talent is asking you for, which might not be what, someone else needs. Maybe not what a certain teacher who has a certain blueprint that they want to, tell you how to do your thing. That's kind of more of being in the monastery again. So for me, I found in my own process dealing with these things that there was a reason why I was seeking out this forest tradition of meditation. Those reasons why I was trying to create musical programming and cultural contexts that honored individuals' voices in a way that brought together craft, tradition, creativity, and also, most importantly, this space of vulnerability, of openness. And that, I think, is one of the hardest things to cultivate in our culture because we just don't have the tools. We're not given permission to let our experience work on us. If anything, we're constantly being given directives to do the opposite, to not listen to that. Maybe not, consciously, someone isn't saying to you, don't listen to yourself today. But on some level, we're rewarded, financially, socially, for not taking that extra time to go deep into our own felt feeling of being. So I'll just do one more guided meditation to kind of continue with this process of going deeper into ourselves. And then, as I said, there'll be a kind of musical component, and I will stop talking, which maybe some of you might appreciate. But so let's go back to the breaths again. And if it's comfortable, we'll do the same kind of squeezing on the exhale and relaxing on the inhale. Soft gaze, eyes a few feet in front or closed, hands on the knees. And we just inhale. We'll do 6 exhalations like this. So we just squeeze on the exhale, pull the belly button forward, pulling the perineum up, and then relaxing. Just really relaxing into the inhale, letting go into the inhale. And then squeezing on the exhale. Again, we're just looking to touch into this sense of space in the belly. And just fully squeezing out on the exhale, noticing whatever tension we might be holding. And when you inhale, just relax. Don't try to make the tension go away. You're just relaxing, letting the breath come in and permeate your belly. And just looking for a feeling of ease, of space, relaxation. And when you're done with the squeezing on the exhales, continue to just allow your belly to breathe fully and deeply and naturally with your mind just a couple inches behind your belly button in the center, like a balloon expanding and deflating. And then we're going to bring our awareness to our feet. And we're going to imagine that each pore of skin on our toes can breathe in air. They're like little nostrils. And we're going to breathe air into our 2 big toes. Just like we were breathing into the belly, we breathe in through the pores of our toes into the center of our toes. And then just relax on the exhale. And continue to breathe into the 2 big toes. We're seeing if we can feel into any tension in the toes, any qualities of the skin, toenails, ligaments, tendons, bones. Just notice if we can wake up any of the sensations in our 2 big toes. Breathing in cool air through the pores on the inhale. Just relaxing into the sense of space. And continue to breathe into the big toes, but include the 3 middle toes and the baby toes. So you're breathing in through all 10 toes, through the pores, and just noticing the qualities, the felt sense of your toes, the differences in personality. The big toes might be easier to feel. The middle toes are a little vague, maybe harder to isolate. Baby toes are more shy. Just noticing the wide range of personality in our toes, while still breathing fully into the belly, keeping that connection, the sense of peace and space, permeating that feeling into our toes through the breath. Include the balls of the feet and the arches. Just relaxing whatever feelings come up, just breathing into the belly, letting them happen. Include the heels and the ankles, and the tops of the feet. Just breathing fully into the belly. So we're breathing in through both feet completely now. Just noticing any qualities. Could be a coolness, a shimmering, tension, numbness. Numbness itself is a feeling. We're just allowing the breath to come in and permeate these different aspects, these different qualities in our feet. Just noticing how our body responds, how it responds to the phone, how it responds to our inner sensations, and how our breath might shorten, hold, tense, open, depending on the energy that we come into contact with. And so again, through meditation, we're learning to permeate our body through our breath with awareness. Make more room for this awareness to come down into our experience, into our felt sense of being. And there are further practices where basically this is the object of meditation. You can go through your whole body this way while rooted in the belly, and it's not about what thoughts you're having or are not having. It's a process that you're making friends with, you're becoming acquainted with. And it's less about doing it right and more about saying yes to that relationship with yourself. And again, having these kinds of tools, having a craft, allows it to grow and deepen, just like an art form. We need a language to communicate, and in this case, communicate with ourselves, with our experience. And one last dimension of this for this evening. This feeling of space can also be extended into the outer environment. In many ways, space doesn't have an inner or an outer, it's just space. But the same kind of care and awareness that you can bring within yourself, you can also, of course, extend this out into the environment around you. And there's a term in the Tibetan tradition called the dralas. And the dralas are also these sort of magical beings, sort of like the daemon, the genius, but they live on the outside, and you sort of need to invoke them. And in order to invoke them, you have to put care into the space around you. Just like we're in this moment practicing this way of putting more care and attention into our own bodies. What happens when we put care and attention into our environment? I mean, this is something we all innately understand, in your home, or in a space like this? Why do we come to gather in a space that's beautiful, that we feel is beautiful? And why does it bring an extra sense of magic to take the time to do that? It's not something that you can just, use AI to create and go, oh, that's great. It's as much about the process of everyone who played a role in creating this space and in restoring this space. And so between working with oneself and learning to fully inhabit our own experience in this way, and also working with the world around us, whether it's our homes, or the spaces that we like to be and share with others, the more we can bring this kind of intention that's rooted in this deep way of being, that's in a way kind of always reminding us of the meaning that comes from opening and saying yes to our experience in this bigger way. Again, this is nothing new. Sacred sites around the world, this is what it's all about, right? Humans were like, okay, the world is really hard, so let's create some beautiful spaces so that life feels more workable. Life feels more like we want to be here. And I very much feel that music, especially today more than ever, is here to serve this process, this purpose. It always has. And I just think it needs a little bit of a recentering by bringing in deeper knowledge, deeper wisdom of what it means to be a human being versus this kind of current path that if you talk to, say, a lot of classical musicians, it could be other art forms, there's a lot of pressure and most of it isn't leading into this. But I think we very much need this in the world, and I think any artist who truly loves what they do finds fulfillment through the moments when they feel that they are doing this, whether they're conscious of what that is, or not. You can feel that, and you can feel when you're in the presence of an artist who is doing that. I think ultimately we care much more about that than the content specifics of what they're doing. Certainly much more than the technical wizardry or skill that they might be doing it with. Although that can be exciting and interesting. Those are the waves on the ocean. It could be a stormy, really amazing ocean. It could be just a still lake with a beautiful, simple line of a mountain on it or something like that. So, to continue with the spirit of bringing these together, as well as this idea of the dralas. The other day, when Michael and I were talking about giving this talk, he said, well, in the basement there's all these interesting props and also these backdrops that were used for theater productions here in this club that were created by members of this club to put on these elaborate theatrical stage productions. And they're all wrapped up in sacks down there with little tags on them that say things like, mountain scene or winter time or, whatever. So we opened some of them up, and there was one that said the Himalayas. And I said, oh, that's interesting, and in a way might be suited to some of the talk. And so we brought it up here, we unfolded it, and it's huge. It's pretty beautiful, too. It's amazing. It was created by a woman, Lois Tomlinson, in 1960. Yeah. It's up here behind us. It's being unveiled for the first time maybe in 65 years. I was just sitting down there. And there's tons of them down there. Yeah. And, Michael and I were talking about how cool it would be to maybe commission some new works of music, each based on one of these backdrops. But I just thought that this one was suited because there's a few different creative liberties being taken here. We have the Himalayas, I guess, back there. But then it looks mysteriously like Lake Tahoe in the front, I think. I think I was actually over here a few months ago. And then we have a stupa over here, a Tibetan stupa. on one of the mountains. Reminds me a bit of Lost Horizon, the book, if anyone knows this book. Kind of gives that feeling. The play was called The Missing Link, and it was a comedy. Michael sent me a news clipping that was in the paper about it. That was a drama comedy about the Cold War and Russia and America competing to find the abominable snowman in the Himalayas. That was what it was about. That's not exactly related, but I like the creativity there. So the point is, these happy accidents where we had no idea what was down there, but this felt somehow meaningful. It felt somehow appropriate. So I said, well, maybe I'll just improvise something on the piano based on that to kind of, wrap things up. So that's what I'm going to do. And then maybe we can take a couple questions, if there are any. But, I just, even in larger spaces, as I said, I still like to feel like I'm closer. And originally I wanted to do it down by the Fireside, but for technical reasons and all that, we decided to do it up here. But, with music, for me, again, the most important thing is, I guess, being understood as to why one is making music. And it wasn't until I actually heard the improvisations of Keith Jarrett, actually, the pianist who some might know, but he did these solo concerts where he would just sit and play, without any particular plan beforehand for an hour or 2 hours. And there was something about the state of being, the state of presence that I felt was coming behind the music that I was really drawn to. I didn't really know anything about meditation yet, but in some way I felt that's, there was something meaningful in that. And interestingly, years later, when I did go and study at this school, one of the teachers who was a student of the teacher who, brought the whole tradition to the U.S., said I came in and he was playing the same recording of Keith Jarrett in his class, and he said, this piece is the closest thing to the presence of my teacher. And I thought that was very interesting. And I read later that Keith Jarrett, when he was younger, he was learning classical music as a child. He played some classical as an adult, but he was mostly known as an improviser. And he said while he was learning this, his brother, who was younger than him, was going through a lot of difficulty in school, and he would just sit down at the piano with no knowledge of what he was doing and just unleash a lot of intensity. And he said, a lot of it was just chaos, but there was these moments that were really powerful and felt significant. And so he thought to himself, well, how can I put myself in that place as a player, as someone who, is learning a craft? How can I just put myself into this space of pure creativity, of pure spontaneity? And I do think that meditation, whether it's conscious or not, that willingness to just drop all agenda is part of how that becomes workable and possible. But to me, somehow, when all of these things come together, that's what I've always been really drawn to. And that spirit of spontaneity, of authenticity, of vulnerability, is, I think, what we're trying to do in a sense through the musical cultural work that we do through our organization here, and here in the club as well. So thanks for hanging out and listening to me. This is a bit of an experiment to articulate all of this to an audience, but now I'll just briefly play something that will somehow relate to this, and I guess we'll all decide later if we feel like it did. That's it. That's everything. I don't know, as we wind down, if anyone has any thoughts, reflections, or questions, I guess I'd be happy to. Yes? I think it's a great question, and it's actually one that comes up a lot in the conversations we have with the musicians. I in no way had a traditional musical training or path, and so am very far away from being remotely close to that experience. But work with many, many people who do have that experience. And I think, connecting to some of the things that we've been talking about or I've been articulating, I think that the idea of a child prodigy in this culture is quite unbalanced and quite destructive often to those who are too young and are pushed into a situation because they might have a natural ability, but it's a rare teacher or community or organization that knows how to honor and foster that talent and creativity in a way that does justice and honors the human being. And I think it's quite confusing for people on the outside because there's a lot of worship. It's a genius. But, is a person truly, again, going back to that term of genius, if often you're put into this situation, you're practicing so many hours a day, you're doing so much, you're neglecting a lot of other aspects of development as a human being. And it sort of sets you up for failure in life in one way or another. It can. I mean, I'm not being cynical about it because talent is central. But I feel, from what I am observing in the culture, when I see someone who has an ability, who's young, I find wanting to really protect and affirm and instill a sense of listen to yourself, listen to your own intuition, find teachers who want to support you, because often people will want to latch on to that, create a star, not always, but the way that classical music in particular is transferred from student to teacher can be very destructive and I think can very much dishonor the individual and their unique genius. But, that's not to say, like you said, some do go on and they figure it out. But it's often in spite of those conditions. And I think particularly today, I can't speak of another time because I haven't been there, but today with the industry in the way that it is now, I think that there is a much more deeper, fuller, more meaningful way to work with someone who has those gifts and the role that they can play in society and the role that maybe they did play in society in the past of like, oh, we have our musician, they're just really talented and they're going to play all the village tunes, something like that. But what does that look like on this very, grand level of something like classical music? Most of the people that we work with who some came out of that are on their own journeys right now. And often they're breaking from the big name institutions, the big presenting organizations. Not all of them, but a lot of them are, and trying to find a new pathway. And I think that's part of the work that we're trying to do, is heal some of that and show other opportunities, other ways to share their gifts with audiences that, if anything, are more grateful to have that opportunity. And it might actually impact their lives more than in ways that other people might not have imagined, Hopefully that answers the question, at least my version of the answer. Mm-hmm.
This is a simpler question, but I'll make it more complex by saying I think wordplay can be a form of creativity. And I think I'm thinking, tuba, there's just like tuba.
Tupa stufa, yeah.
And the far right-hand peak over there, I swear, is exactly what boundary peak would be in a photograph.
Well, sure, there was references, right? They probably drew. This is why I also love this, because it's kind of alchemical, It's it's merging place and time and culture. Even if it was for a lighthearted production, there's a lot here. There's people put a lot. This is a big undertaking, and it's inspiring that someone would just do this for no other reason than to share it, which is again, very much in line, I suppose, with what we're saying. But yes, metaphor. You could say music is metaphorical language. Leonard Bernstein had a whole presentation about how music is a metaphorical language, and it is a metaphorical language in many ways. Language is metaphor. In a way, all communication is metaphor, because what are we actually talking about? Do we even really know what we're talking about? I think the more you go into something like meditation, the more you realize you don't know anything. Actually, that's the default. I don't know. And we're usually like, I need to know something. I need to cling on to something. And so meditation gently leaves you in I don't know. And then metaphor, it becomes sort of the main way of inspiration to communicate with others, I think. I found that when I left, because I was more involved in a more insular environment where most people would have done practices and been aware of all of these things, and you end up using terms that everyone knows. And when I sort of removed myself from that environment and just talking to whoever, I had to make up new words that maybe I used their words, or you become playful with words. And I think that's a big part of even music, like teaching. Good teachers use metaphor all the time. Tanya Tompkins is over there, who's a wonderful cellist, who we just had do a master class with another wonderful cellist, Chase Park, and Audrey Vardanica, the wonderful pianist. I'm just kind of putting them all on the spot, but it doesn't matter because this is a tiny little audience. So there was something that you said around the what was it, the bones rattling in the coffin. I thought that for was it Beethoven or it was just so perfect, and I just think that's such a beautiful way to use metaphor to inspire on that, like the currents level, not the waves, not being like, well, this wave moves from this chord into this chord, and it's much more like a witch casting a spell, and actually Chopin was said to have taught that way, where he even would use that metaphor, where he said, this passage is a witch flying across the sky, and that's it. Now you got to deal with that and work it out, so that way your own daemon is involved, as where I think when you just give the concept in a literal description, you are excluding, not intentionally, but you're not giving the person a chance to find their own words. I think Tanya, now that I called on you, mentioned you. No. Well, I think that's when we're talking about the art of interpretation versus the art of improvisation, right? And we've kind of done this sometimes. I think that, I can't speak to the interpretation side of it because I don't do that. I watch it a lot. But I think it's, because I didn't go through the training, right? I didn't go through that kind of training. And I do think that there's a way to go through that training where you don't develop a critical, not critical, but that shameful part. But again, a lot of teachers, it's kind of in the air, right? A lot. I think when you're improvising, maybe it's very simple. You don't have time. You just don't have time to do that. It just has to be what it is, because it kind of has to be what it already has a feeling. And then I think to the best of your ability, you just try to make that happen with your hands, and then you're on to the next thing. Another way of looking at these three, the meditation, creativity, and music or craft, if you turn them on the side as time, it's like meditation is the openness, that how we started, the open, I don't know. And then, something arises. The currents want to go this way. Okay. And then okay, well, how do I do this? Like, how do I move my hands? And I'm not thinking, how do I move my hands? But my hands go, okay, and then it's back again to, okay, now what? Oh, something, and you're just kind of, the whole process is to just kind of follow that, be in that current. And I mean, I'm sure that's the same as your process, but I think maybe I have the luxury of not having to answer to anybody but what's coming out of my daemon in that moment. And I think I'm just so stubborn about that I only want to make music that comes from me and draw sounds that resonate with that feeling. And I think that's just my personality, you know. But I think one of the benefits of that is that I just don't have any awareness of that, I guess. I mean, I'm critical of what's more like from a composer's perspective, probably, of like, this could have been more, like, I could have fleshed this out more. I went back to that chord again. You know, it's kind of like happening somewhere. But I think the demand of like coming up with something on the spot and then figuring out how to execute it really quickly and moving on to the next thing just takes so much of time to focus on that there's just not much room for anything else to happen. Kind of like with the somatic meditations, you're just tuning into your body and your mind is just sort of like a blip afterthought kind of a thing. I mean, I don't know. I guess that's the clearest way. But I think the point is just that there's like a strong, this kind of has to happen right now. And I just kind of, if anything, I feel like I'm just hacking through it to get to the next thing. Well, I don't know if that's entirely true. I'm doing my best to surrender into that process. Like practice like scales and things.
No, I meant you sit down at a certain time, certain focus on something you want to either work on.
I think listening is a lot of just listening to music that I am inspired by, and then kind of like later trying to mimic my version of what I heard. So if it's like a classical piano prelude and I liked a certain harmony, a certain combination of tones, then I'll go, oh, that's cool. Let me play with that for a little while. Or sometimes I'll like sort of try to sit down and actually read music and pull some things that way. But they seem to stick better when I just listen and then just try to make up my take on what it was. And there's definitely things that I hear that I really resonate, like it lights up, like that feeling lights up, like, oh yeah, that thing. And you know, I think it's like anything, right? Like it's like architecture. You see a Maybach home or something, and you're like, oh, that's incredible. I love that. I want to make that. And so I think practice, I mean, I'm very undisciplined in the traditional way. Most of my practice is just improvising, and then like trying to bring in some of this other sounds that I seem to resonate with. Yeah, I think with meditation, like meditation as a practice, not necessarily just to like feel relaxed or peaceful or whatever, you know, but like meditation in the sense of, I don't know how to deal with my experience. How do I learn how to open to my experience? Often that is basically just saying, I don't know how to feel vulnerable, but I know that I am vulnerable. I know I'm going to die. I know that I'm, you know, not everything is going to work out the way I want. I know I'm going to look stupid. I know I'm going to make the mistakes that I try not to. Right? Like all of these are leading to vulnerability. Well, I think maybe it's just a way to be yourself when you're alone. And even if there's another person in the room, it feels different when you're improvising. I think if you're working on a piece, it's also feels different when someone's in the room, but there's also so much that you can focus on that maybe you can block that out a bit. But if you're improvising, you're sort of in that meditation state, and you're just like receiving everything that's in the room, and that can actually make, I think I'm more self-conscious in those settings than actually in a performative or alone, because it's like that vulnerability where you start being like, well, how's this person perceiving what I'm doing? But if there's too many people out there, you kind of can't do that anymore because there's just too many. But I've always really appreciated that when someone speaks to vulnerability, who's either with music or meditation, because it's like easy to forget, and you're like, oh yeah, like I'm always trying to cover that, like always. And with music, it's like that's what we want. Like we crave to see someone not trying to put something over on us, but to actually show up and be like honest. So yeah, I don't know if that answers it, but yeah. Yeah, thanks for coming, everyone.